Hey everybody. It's another INFJ. This is another live stream because, as I've said before, my computer keeps filling up the memory and I am too lazy to go get an external hard drive. So with this video, this is going to be part one of a two-part series. And I actually recommend, if any of you stumble across this while it's live, I'd recommend just sort of waiting and then watching the video after I've posted everything. But the reason is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a series of POLR tests that I've come up with, and I will give credit to other people online that do similar things, such as host Eric over at Talking with Famous People. But these are little POLR tests that I've come up with, and so what I'm going to do, and so I'd like this to be a little bit interactive. So I'd ask you, if you want to go through this whole exercise and try to figure out what your polar function is, then open up like an empty Word doc or something, because I'm going to ask you to actually generate answers. And I'd ask that you actually do generate the answers. Number one, so you can remember what it was when I post part two about sort of what I'm looking for. So what your initial reaction was. And then number two, which I'm going to explain in much more detail in the second part of this video, or part two of this, whatever. My argument's going to be, whatever your polar function is the function where it like took the most energy to generate an answer. So if you're not actually taking the time to come up with an answer and actually write it out, or anything like that, then you don't really get a good sense of how much energy it took you. Because it's very easy for us to trick ourselves into thinking up an answer. But it's another thing to actually have to generate output. And and sort of face the reality, especially if you INFJs out there, facing the reality of what you think your mind is doing versus what you can actually generate in the real world. Okay, so all that being said, please, if you want to participate, please participate, and please try to generate answers. And I'll sort of do a little, I'll let you know when you can pause and sort of write it out and take however much time you need to do it. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is come up with 3 things that are pretty mindless activities, mindless tasks that you've been putting off that you need to do at some point. And something that you can do around the house. So, example, maybe, tidying up the living room or watering the plants, something very simple and mindless. So come up with 3, and feel free to pause the video here while you write them out. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you've written them out. And don't just think about them in your head, actually write them out. So I'm going to let you pause again. Okay, now, if you've unpaused and you've actually written them out, now write 3 more. 3 more mindless things that you've been putting off that you need to do. And again, I'll let you pause the video and write them out. Okay, now you should be back and you should have 6 things written out. And again, I can't stress enough, actually write these out, because this is all about how much mental energy does it take to generate a response. And if you just sort of think of them, you're going to fool yourself into thinking that it was easier than it actually was. So if you actually have to write out 6 things, that's going to be testing you a little bit more. Now, if if you couldn't come up with a single one, then congratulations, you're an ESTP and you can move on. But for all of the other of us, now that you have your 6 menial tasks written out, go do one of them. Pause the video and just go do it. So if you have to water, if you put down water the plants, go water the plants. Take 30 seconds and go do it. And I will be here when you unpause. And actually go do it. Don't just think about doing it, all you INFPs out there. Okay. Now, hopefully you've gone and you've watered your plants or done whatever menial task it is. Again, pause the video and now go do a second one. So if it's like pay a bill online or something like that, just go do it. And I'm going to pause the video again. Okay, welcome back. Now, I just want you to take a mental note, or if you want to write it down, feel free, but write down, sort of just take a mental note of how much energy that took. And the reason I did it first was, that's the one that's going to probably take the most physical energy, and I don't want to tire everybody out. But just sort of make a note of, first of all, how much energy it took to just generate the list that you have. And then number two, how much mental energy it took to do the first one and then the second one. And if those INFPs out there that are, justifying it in their head that, you'll just go do it later, pause the video and go do both of those tasks. You'll thank me later. Okay, moving on to the next one. For this one, again, I want you to actually write out the response. Don't just think about it, write it out. And I want you to think of the last time you went to a convenience store or Target or grocery store and you got just a handful of items. So more than one item, but, less than, around 5, right? Between 1 and 5 items or so in that ballpark. Not when you're like stocking up for the month or whatever. So you went to Target, convenience store, grocery store, whatever, and you just picked up a handful of items. Tell me about the last time you did it. Write out where it was. Write out what items you got. Write out the brand name of the items that you got. And if it's like a store brand, then just put store brand. Now write out in reverse order the order that you picked up the objects from the store. So if your objects are like eggs, milk, and cereal, and you got the eggs last, put the eggs first in your list, and then whatever the middle one was, and then whatever the first one was. So reverse order from how you picked it out in the store. Okay. And again, feel free to pause so you can write these out. Now, the next thing is tell me whether the cashier was male or female or non-binary. Was the cashier older or younger than you? Okay. And if you had to guess, what was the cashier's name? Even if you don't remember specifically, just take a wild guess. Now, if you used self-checkout, then just try to think of whoever the cashier was that you saw, when you're using self-checkout. Okay. All right, so now we're going to move on to the next one. For this one, it's important to understand the instructions here, right? So feel free to back up if you're not completely following the instructions or understanding what I'm asking you to do. But I'm going to give you a scenario or like a proposition, and I'm going to ask you to write out, excuse me, at least 2 things that are necessarily true, okay? And you have to assume whatever I'm telling you is absolutely true, right? I'm not lying or making anything up. Whatever I say is absolutely true, okay? All right, the first one is on July 1st, 2025, and a nuclear bomb was set off. Okay. On July 1st, 2025, a nuclear bomb was set off. Then on July 30th, 2025, Ryan Smith was born. Again, on July 30th, 2025, Ryan Smith was born. Okay? So write out two things that have to necessarily be true based off of that information and that information alone. You can only use that information and come up with two things that have to necessarily be true. Okay. Now that you've done that, again, pause the video if you need time. Write down two more things that have to necessarily be true given the facts that I gave you. So again, on July 1st, 2025, a nuclear bomb was set off. Then on July 30th, 2025, Ryan Smith was born. Okay. So you should have four things that are necessarily true based off of the limited amount of information that I gave you. Okay. All right. So now we're going to move on to the next one, or the next question in this phase. Here's another question for you. So you can forget about the nuclear bomb one. Now it's a new set of facts. Okay. Kate is the only person on Earth who does not like chocolate cake. Okay. Kate is the only person on Earth who does not like chocolate cake. Ryan is a person, and Ryan does not like chocolate cake. What two conclusions can you come up with that are necessarily true? And they could be mutually exclusive. So in other words, you could come up with one conclusion and it doesn't necessarily have to match up with the second conclusion. Just come up with two conclusions from that limited amount of information. And what I'm trying to say is those two conclusions can contradict each other, but they can't contradict the original propositions that I gave you. So again, I realize this is probably getting confusing, so I'm going to repeat it. Kate is the only person on Earth who does not like chocolate cake. Ryan is a person and does not like chocolate cake. Okay, so write out what you think you can conclude, and it has to, and again, both conclusions would have to be valid, true conclusions. Now, in this case, they don't have to necessarily be true, but they are valid conclusions based off of the information I gave you. Okay. And wait for part two for an answer if you're stuck, but try to come up with something. Okay. Moving on. The next one, I want you to think of the last piece of furniture that you purchased where you had to assemble it. And if you haven't purchased anything that you have to assemble recently, just think of like a chair. Let's say you got a chair from IKEA. It's got four legs, a seat, and a back, right? I want you to write out, and again, write this out. Don't just think about it, write it out. Because again, there's a big difference between generating the answer and just kind of thinking that you know the answer. Write out, let's just say you are asked by IKEA or whoever to write out the instructions for everybody who has to assemble this piece of furniture. And you have to do it in 6 steps. Now write out the 6 steps that it takes to put together the piece of furniture you're thinking of. So it could be the chair or it could be whatever you purchased, but it has to be done in 6 steps. So write that out, just like what you would see when IKEA gives you the instructions. And I'm going to give you time to write it out, so feel free to pause. Okay, and welcome back. Now I want you to do the same thing, but write it out in 4 steps instead of 6 steps. So again, pause, actually take the time to generate an answer, write it out in 4 steps instead of 6. And again, I'll give you time to do it. So go ahead and pause. Go ahead and do it. Write it out. And again, you INFPs out there, stop cheating. Write it out. Okay. All right. So that's that for that one. Now, the next one in this little domain is imagine a scenario where the post office general suddenly passes away. And due to some wrinkle in constitutional law, it turns out that you are the successor to the postmaster general for whatever reason. It's on you. You are the one in the for whatever country you live in. I'm kind of assuming United States here, but if you live in another country, whoever is in charge of your post office, right? You are now responsible, and the job is now yours. And not only that, but you have to start next Monday, whenever that is. And not only that, but there's a crisis afoot where they need you to come up with a plan to cut 10% of the budget over the next 5 years. Okay. And they do not have the time or the resources to do any sort of fact finding mission or have any committees formed to give you a recommendation. You have to come up with the answer on your own, and you cannot rely on committees or other people at the post office because turns out they are all against you and you can't rely on any information they give you. So you have to come up with a way to shave off 10% of the budget over the next 5 years, given the information you know about the post office. And that might be a lot and it might be a little, but you got to come up with a solution. Now go. Take the time, write out 2 or 3 sentences, 2 or 3 things that you would do to cut 10% of the budget. Okay. All right. Now, welcome back. You've written out your answer. Now, come up with 2 more. And again, don't just do this in your head, actually write it out. So you should have at least 4 items total of things that you would do to cut the budget by 10% over the next 5 years. Now write 2 more. And obviously these are 2 solutions or proposals that you didn't have before, right? The president needs 6 bullet points, right? 6 things that you're going to do to cut the budget by 10%. Now each one of them doesn't necessarily have to cut the budget by 10%, but just sort of as a whole, hopefully you'll cut 10%. Okay. So you should have a list of at least 6 items. All right. Moving on. Next thing is your I'm trying to think of the order here. Okay. Think of 3 things in your kitchen that you really like. 3 things about your kitchen or in your kitchen that you really like. And write those out. Now think of three things in your kitchen that you don't really like, or that you don't like, you dislike, you. And then it could be things about your kitchen or things in your kitchen that you dislike. Okay. So now you should have three things written down that you like about your kitchen and three things that you dislike about your kitchen. Now, for the three things that you dislike about your kitchen, give an explanation of why you haven't changed it. Why you continue to put up with it, something that you don't like. And I'll give you some time to come up with answers, right? So there's something about your kitchen or in your kitchen that you don't like, but for whatever reason, you have not done anything to change it, and why. Okay. So now that you're back and you've written out why, if any of your answers are just like, I don't have the money, or I'm too lazy to do it, um, something sort of trivial like that, now provide an explanation of why you would why you don't spend the money on change. So for example, you said, I don't have the money to replace my stove or whatever. Why not? Why not? Why have you not saved up to make the replacement? Or if it's something like, I'm just too lazy to do it or to make the change, why have you're obviously out there doing other things. Why haven't you taken the time to make whatever the change is? So write that out. Okay. All right. The next question in this sort of domain is, write out three songs or movies or books. It could be whatever medium you want, um, that you like, that your significant other, so if you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband and wife, that they don't like. And if you don't have a significant other, then think of, somebody close to you, like a brother or sister or a parent, but somebody close to you where you kind of know what their opinions are about things. So three books or movies or songs, again, it could be whatever medium you choose, that you like, that this other person would not like. Okay. Now try to come up with three things that three songs, books, or movies, again, whatever medium you want, that the other person likes that you don't like. Okay. So again, pause. Now, this one might be a little tricky, but do your best. So, going back to the things that you like that the other person does not like, give me a reason why. Why do you like it and they don't like it? And it could be different for each one, but give me a reason why. And again, write it out. Number two, same thing. Why do they like the things that they like and you don't like them? And think of the specific examples, not just like, they like rock music and I don't like rock music. Think of the actual specific examples you gave. Okay. And the last one on this, what could you do to convince the other person to like the song that you like, or the movie or the book? What could you tell them about it that you think would convince them to like it? Okay. Moving on. Next one. Let's say, so new scenario here. You owe your best friend $100 and you were supposed to pay it to them tomorrow. But problem is you don't have the $100 and you're not going to be able to pay it to them tomorrow. What do you do? So again, pause the video and come up with a solution to this quandary or this problem you're facing. What are you going to do? Okay, welcome back. Now the next one, same scenario. You owe your friend $100. You don't have the money. You got to pay it to them by tomorrow. You came up with something you're going to do about it. Now come up with something else, a new approach that's different than the first approach you provided to solve this problem. Okay. Next one. Again, pause the video. Now come up with a third approach, a third thing that you could do that is not like the first thing or the second thing, but a third alternative for dealing with this problem. And write it out. Okay. So welcome back. You should have 3 things on how to deal with the fact that you owe your friend $100. Okay. All right. Next one. Come up with a definition of enlightened and write it out. Take, a sentence or two, write out a definition of what it means to be enlightened. Okay. So now you should have your definition of what it means to be enlightened. Now write out a definition that you think a Catholic bishop would give you for the definition of enlightened. So put yourself in the Catholic bishop's perspective and write out what you think they would give you as a definition for the word enlightened. Okay. And now come up with a definition of what somebody in China would give you to define enlightened. And if you are in China or of Chinese descent, then come up with something that somebody in Germany would give you for the definition of enlightened. Okay. Now I want you to do the same thing, but for the word justice. Come up with your definition of justice. Write it out. Okay. And now again, come up with a definition of justice that a Catholic bishop would give you. Write that out. And for the third one, a little bit of a twist, come up with a word or definition of justice that a cowboy in the old Wild West, the 1800s in the United States, somebody in a cowboy movie, what they would define as justice. Okay, write that out. Okay, last one, I think. For this one, I'm going to tell you a sort of a prompt or sort of a scenario for a story. And I want you to write out sort of an explanation of the story. Let me give you the prompt and then I'll let you know what I'm looking for you to write out. Okay. So the scenario is Kate, or let's just say Kate, a character in a story, moves into a new apartment, and there is a room where her dog refuses to go into that room. No matter what she tries, the dog just absolutely refuses to go into the room. Now, write a 1-paragraph explanation of what's going on in this story. And again, this is a story. This is your story. So you can come up with any explanation you want. Nobody's looking for a specific explanation. There's no magic here or trick. This is not a trick question. You just come up with your own story that explains why that dog won't go into that room. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute or two, pause the video, and write out, a paragraph or so why this dog won't go into that room. Okay. Now you should be back. You should have a paragraph. Again, you INFPs, stop cheating. Actually write it out. You INTPs also. I know you think you've got it in your head, but write it out. Generate a response. So if you haven't, pause the video and write out an explanation of why this dog won't go into that room. For those of you who have done it, write out another explanation that is completely different than the first explanation you gave, and as different as possible, right? Okay. So again, you should have the 2 things written out, and now do a third one where you're going to come up with a third completely different explanation of why this dog won't go into that room, and try to make it as different as possible from your first 2 scenarios or your first 2 explanations. Okay. You should be back, and now you should have 3 explanations. Now come up with a fourth one. A fourth one that is completely different than your first 3, that is not that is as unlike your first 3 as possible. So not similar at all. A completely different explanation of why this dog won't go into the room. And again, it's your story. You can come up with whatever explanation you want. Okay, so that's it. That's part 1. Again, I hope you've actually written out your responses. For those of you who were cheating and not writing out any responses, I would invite you to go back and actually do it to where you have to generate some sort of output, because the entire point that I'm going to be making in part 2 of this video is that this is all about effort. This is all about how much effort does it take to generate a response or to generate some sort of action. Not how much effort it takes to just think about it, but how much effort it takes to actually do something based off of that information. And I'll get into more detail on that in part 2. Okay, cool. See you on part 2, which I'm going to post live, in the next few minutes or so. Okay, thanks.